The first time I came across Hoppy personally, although I'd known about him for most of my life, was in 2002 when I was writing my book about Pink Floyd's first album, Piper at the Gates of Dawn. And the thing that I found about this man, whom we've heard all these remarkable testimonials to in that film, is that he is the most unassuming of people. Because if you say to him, well, you know, you were involved and you were the catalyst, well, I don't know about that. And I wonder, Hoppy, if perhaps you're giving personality rather than being somebody who's out for self-aggrandizement is why your name is slightly overshadowed, and why this, this exhibition seems to be, raising your profile when I think your profile should have been huge years ago.
The celebrated fallacy is was equals is equals will be, meaning that things don't stay the same. And I think really, if we're looking at the events of the 60s and seeing what we can learn about them and which will inform us now, it would be good to try and get rid of the personality cult, because I think that throws a veil over what really happened, and it's not really necessary.
But let's go back to those very early days, Hoppy, and what were the first things you remember in your life that impacted on you as far as photography and image were concerned?
Well, if I go back right to the beginning, after I graduated and my godfather gave me a small domestic camera, I started seeing the structure of trees without leaves on in the winter, the network of trolley bus wires, which you found sometimes in cities with trolley buses against the sky. Those sort of semi-abstract things caught my eye, but in the first 2 or 3 years when I had a camera, I was learning to see. I was completely self-taught until I came to London and got a job as a photographer's assistant, and he very kindly showed me many techniques, many darkroom techniques particularly, that led to my being able to do freelance work. And the next thing was, I found myself in a rich cultural milieu with people. In the early 60s, society was beginning to be more liberated, and everybody was experimenting with music, rock and roll, jazz, with art, with culture, with lifestyle, with sex. All sorts of stuff was going on. So it was a very rich season of change. And I felt completely at home with that, like a fish in the ocean.
There are some particularly marvellous photographs of political and activist figures around in this exhibition. That picture there, the second one along the Malcolm X one, looks as though that's been, that could have had a great deal of time spent over it to achieve what you have with that image. Was that something you arrived at, just in the moment? You didn't have a chance to set that up. But your perceptions to achieve those things at that time must have been very sharply honed. Tell me about your approach to those kind of photographs.
Well, I think actually that when you're earning your living by photography and you do it more or less all the time, it's rather like driving a car. When you begin, you have to think everything out. But gradually, more and more of it becomes incorporated on an instinctive or a subconscious level. The conscious thinking that you do is not very much. I mean, you remember not to tread on people's toes as you're walking past them backwards, and sort of remember where you put your camera box. But actually, I think the more it becomes an instinctive act. That leaves you free to look at other aspects of the situation. You've learned enough so that the technical calculation happens by itself. The pictures of Malcolm X were taken at a local meeting organised by a Muslim group, which is a very unusual thing in those days. And I think the date was 1964. He came and spoke in a small packed meeting in Notting Hill and was very well received. Unfortunately, a couple of months later he was assassinated in New York. And looking back, I think he had a premonition that this was likely to happen.
Another thing that was happening at that time and became centred in London was the sudden explosion of British music beat group explosion, if you like, that really did encircle the world. And you were there when that happened. That's strongly reflected in the book as well. Tell me about the impact of those days in your life.
Well, one of the results of being mixed up with rock and roll bands was that when it came to underground activity, if you like, it was a way of channeling resources from the rich music scene into the less rich underground scene. People like Lennon and the other Beatles contributed not only by drawing attention to what was going on, but also by making donations, enabling, for instance, the International Times to meet its print bills.
We've mentioned International Times several times in different parts of the context of this story. It might be nice to focus on that now and just talk about the momentum that gathered and how it came to be launched.
Following the Albert Hall poetry reading, that emphasised for many of us that there wasn't really a regular organ of communication so that people could find out what was going on in the so-called underground. So a group of us decided to start a paper called International Times in order to fill that gap.
Because you were putting in so many hours there with it, just giving your life to that thing. And just tell me about the feeling of that.
The first thing that happened to me personally was that I realised that I didn't have time to go on being a photographer. It was either that or to get on with promoting underground events and projects. So I flipped my coin in the air and it came down heads, and I put down my cameras and concentrated from that point onwards on the other things, which are International Times, the UFO Club, the London Free School, the Technicolor Dream, and what's more important, trying to encourage other people who were doing similar things to get on with what they were doing, because I think it's all very well having a nice exhibition and looking at my own personal memories, but I think really it's wrong to characterize what happened in the 60s as being the work of just a few people. It was more like a cultural wave which many people were surfing, and me and my close friends were just a few of those people.
There was definitely a magic in the air in many respects, but in other ways I think what we don't tend to think of so much when that time is, you know, repackaged as some piece of faux nostalgia is how hard a fight it was for some of the people who were involved, like yourself. And you know, it's mentioned in the film there, you being busted, sent down to Wormwood Scrubs for a few months, and described as, what was that, a menace to society or something?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. What do you think?
I think if there were more people around who were menace to society, we'd probably get more change happening faster. It's all right, but if you look at what's happening to people nowadays, I think people nowadays are having a harder time than what we had. And it's worth paying attention and asking ourselves now, where have those liberties gone? Why, when 2 million of us protest about joining the war, why has that had no direct effect? Why have those sort of repressive measures crept in and really reinforced what's already the totalitarian state? Why are there so many video cameras around? Why is the government wasting money on an identity card scheme that will cost billions? Why do we have 4 nuclear submarines? There's nobody to shoot at. There are a lot of things that really aren't right in the society, and I think we have to try to pay attention to them and to try to claw back some of our decision-making power and stop those politicians and bankers running away with it.
In 1967, the judge described him as a menace to society. I think an outstanding example of humanity. Let's hear it for John Hoppy Hopkins.